The 15th century. 10 mind-blowing facts about the century that discovered the world. Medieval Europe had just survived its greatest test. By 1400, the continent had endured the Black Death, papal schisms, endless warfare, and peasant revolts that would have destroyed lesser civilizations. Most cultures would have spent the next century recovering, rebuilding, and trying to get back to where they started. Medieval Europe looked at the smoldering ruins of the 14th century and said, "You know what? Let's go find the rest of the planet." This wasn't recovery. This was explosion. While other civilizations were content to know their own neighborhoods, 15th century Europe decided that wasn't nearly ambitious enough. They would master ocean navigation, circumnavigate Africa, discover entire continents, invent printing, revolutionize art, and fundamentally rewrite the rules of what human civilization could achieve. Columbus didn't just stumble onto America. He represented a civilization that had become so confident in its abilities that finding new worlds seemed like a reasonable Tuesday afternoon project. Gutenberg didn't just invent printing. He accidentally created the information age 5 centuries early. Da Vinci didn't just paint pretty pictures. He basically invented the concept of being really, really good at everything. Want the real mind-bender? While Europe was casually revolutionizing human history, the rest of the world was having a perfectly normal century. China was administrating efficiently. The Islamic world was maintaining its territories. India was trading successfully. Only Europe had decided that normal wasn't interesting enough. By 1500, a continent that had nearly collapsed a century earlier had not only recovered, but had fundamentally altered the trajectory of world history. Every major global development for the next 5 centuries would trace back to innovations that 15th century Europe treated as weekend projects. Welcome to the 15th century, when medieval Europe graduated from surviving disasters to creating them for everyone else. Here are 10 mind-blowing facts about the century that discovered the world. Fact number 1. Columbus accidentally created globalization. Here's what's absolutely wild about Christopher Columbus. He was completely wrong about everything, and it didn't matter. He thought he was sailing to Asia, had no idea America existed, and died still believing he'd found the Indies. Yet his 4 voyages between 1492 and 1504 accidentally created the first global economy. Picture this. Columbus returns from his first voyage with tales of gold, spices, and souls to convert. Within a decade, Spanish conquistadors are systematically conquering American empires that had existed for centuries. Hernán Cortés takes down the Aztec Empire with 600 men. Francisco Pizarro captures the Inca emperor and ransoms him for a room filled with gold. These weren't lucky accidents. They were the result of European disease, technology, and sheer audacity colliding with civilizations that had never seen horses, steel, or smallpox. But here's the part that changed everything. American gold and silver started flooding into Europe. Spanish treasure fleets carried so much precious metal that it caused inflation across the entire continent. Suddenly, a Spanish soldier could afford what used to be luxury goods. European merchants had more capital than they knew what to do with. The global economy had been born, and it ran on American silver. Meanwhile, crops were crossing oceans in both directions. Potatoes from America would eventually feed Europe's population explosion. European wheat transformed American agriculture. Even more mind-blowing, European diseases killed an estimated 90% of Native Americans, creating the demographic catastrophe that would reshape 2 continents. Columbus had set out to find a faster route to Asian spices. Instead, he accidentally connected 2 hemispheres that had been separated for thousands of years. Global trade, global empires, global cultural exchange. It all started with one Italian navigator who was spectacularly wrong about geography. Fact number 2. Gutenberg made books cheap and accidentally started the information revolution. Johannes Gutenberg had a simple problem. Copying books by hand was incredibly expensive and time-consuming. His solution was so revolutionary that we're still dealing with its consequences today. Around 1440, he perfected movable type printing, and suddenly books went from luxury items owned by the wealthy elite to mass-produced commodities that ordinary people could afford. The numbers are staggering. Before printing, Europe might have had 30,000 books total. By 1500, there were over 9 million books in circulation. That's not just growth, that's an explosion. Books became so cheap that merchants, artisans, and farmers could own them. Literacy rates skyrocketed because suddenly there was a reason to learn to read. But Gutenberg had created something far more dangerous than cheap books. He'd created mass media. Martin Luther figured this out first. When he nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, he wasn't just making a local statement. Within months, printed copies were circulating throughout Europe. The Catholic Church had controlled information for centuries through expensive, hand-copied manuscripts. Suddenly, anyone with a printing press could challenge church authority. Scientists started sharing discoveries through printed journals. Merchants published navigation guides and trade manuals. Governments issued official proclamations that reached every corner of their territories. Popular literature exploded, adventure stories, romance novels, and political satire that would have been impossible to distribute widely before printing. Here's what's truly mind-blowing. Gutenberg thought he was just making Bible production more efficient. Instead, he'd created the technology that would enable the Protestant Reformation, the scientific revolution, and eventually every information revolution that followed. The printing press didn't just make books cheaper, it made ideas unstoppable. Fact number 3. The Renaissance decided humans could be good at everything. Leonardo da Vinci was probably the most annoying person in history to be around. He could paint masterpieces that still leave people speechless, design flying machines that actually worked, study human anatomy with scientific precision, engineer military fortifications, compose music, write backwards, and probably make excellent conversation at dinner parties. He wasn't just talented. He was the embodiment of a radical new idea that was sweeping through 15th-century Europe. Renaissance thinkers had looked at medieval culture and decided it was too limiting. Medieval Christianity taught that humans were fallen, sinful creatures who should focus on preparing for the afterlife. Renaissance humanists said, actually, humans are pretty amazing and can accomplish incredible things if they try. This wasn't just optimism. It was a complete philosophical revolution. Michelangelo spent 4 years lying on his back, painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling, creating art so beautiful that people still travel thousands of miles just to stare at it. But he also wrote poetry, designed fortifications, and sculpted marble as if it were clay. When he finished the Pietà, a sculpture so lifelike that people thought it might start breathing, he was only 24 years old. Renaissance education totally rewrote the rules. Instead of just studying theology, students learned classical literature, mathematics, history, rhetoric, and natural philosophy. The idea was to create complete human beings who could excel in multiple fields. They called it the universal man, and they actually managed to produce quite a few of them. This wasn't just about individual achievement. It was about redefining human potential. Renaissance culture said that humans could understand the natural world through observation and reason, create beauty that rivaled divine creation, and improve society through individual excellence. It was an incredibly ambitious vision of what people could accomplish. The Renaissance proved that when you tell people they can be excellent at everything, some of them actually believe you and go ahead and do it. Fact number 4. The Ottomans almost turned Europe Muslim. On May 29th, 1453, something happened that sent shockwaves through European Christianity. Constantinople fell. The Ottoman Empire, led by 21-year-old Mehmed II, had just conquered the last remnant of the Roman Empire and gained control of the crucial link between Europe and Asia. But this wasn't just another military conquest. It was the beginning of Ottoman expansion that would bring Muslim armies to the very heart of Europe. Mehmed II wasn't content with just taking Constantinople. He immediately began planning further European conquests, and his successors made those plans reality. Ottoman armies swept through the Balkans, conquered Hungary, and established permanent control over southeastern Europe. By 1529, Ottoman forces were literally besieging Vienna, the capital of the Holy Roman Empire. Here's what made Ottoman expansion so terrifying for Europeans. They were incredibly good at it. Ottoman military organization was superior to most European armies. They used gunpowder weapons more effectively, had better logistics, and maintained discipline that European feudal armies couldn't match. When they conquered territory, they often governed it better than the previous rulers had. The Ottomans also had a secret weapon: religious tolerance. While European Christians were burning heretics and expelling Jews, Ottoman territories welcomed religious minorities. Jewish refugees from Spain found sanctuary in Ottoman lands. Orthodox Christians often preferred Ottoman rule to Catholic domination. This wasn't just good policy. It was strategic genius that made conquered populations more cooperative. Ottoman naval power dominated the eastern Mediterranean, challenging European control over crucial trade routes. Ottoman fleets could threaten Italian cities, raid European coastlines, and disrupt the commercial networks that European wealth depended on. European nightmares about Ottoman expansion weren't paranoid fantasies. They were realistic assessments of a very real threat. If a few key battles had gone differently, Europeans might have been learning Arabic instead of Latin, and world history would have taken a completely different path. Fact number 5. Portugal figured out how to sail to the end of the world. Portuguese navigators accomplished something that sounds impossible. They figured out how to sail around Africa to reach Asia, opening up sea routes that connected Europe directly with the incredibly wealthy Asian spice trade. This wasn't just impressive seamanship. It was a technological and organizational achievement that changed global commerce forever. Prince Henry the Navigator turned Portugal into Europe's maritime research center. He established a court that brought together the best navigators, cartographers, and shipbuilders from across Europe and the Mediterranean. They systematically improved ship design, navigation techniques, and sailing methods until Portuguese vessels could handle long ocean voyages that had previously been impossible. Portuguese captains pushed further down the African coast with each expedition, mapping coastlines and establishing trading posts. They learned to navigate using stellar observation, improved compass techniques, and detailed charts. When Bartolomeu Diaz finally rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, he proved that ships could reach the Indian Ocean from Europe. Then Vasco da Gama completed the ultimate voyage. Between 1497 and 1499, he sailed around Africa, reached India, and returned to Portugal with a cargo of spices worth 60 times the cost of his expedition. Suddenly, Europeans could access Asian markets directly without paying Islamic middlemen who had controlled overland trade routes for centuries. Portuguese success triggered European competition for Asian trade that would reshape global commerce. Portuguese trading posts stretched from Brazil to China, creating the first global commercial empire. Portuguese merchants established permanent European presence in Asian markets that had been virtually closed to European commerce. But here's the most mind-blowing aspect. Portuguese navigators had solved problems that had puzzled European sailors for centuries. They'd figured out how to navigate by the stars in the southern hemisphere, handle ships in ocean storms, and maintain crews during voyages lasting months. These weren't just technical achievements. They were intellectual breakthroughs that made global exploration possible. Fact number 6. England's Civil War accidentally created a superpower. The Wars of the Roses sound like a romantic conflict about flower symbolism, but they were actually a brutal series of civil wars that accidentally created the political system that would eventually conquer a quarter of the world. Between 1455 and 1487, the houses of Lancaster and York systematically destroyed each other, eliminating the traditional nobility and creating space for something entirely new: centralized royal authority. Here's what made these wars so transformative. They killed off the people who had been limiting royal power for centuries. Medieval English kings had always been constrained by powerful nobles who controlled their own armies, collected their own taxes, and governed their own territories. The Wars of the Roses turned these nobles against each other in a series of battles that decimated the traditional aristocracy. When Henry VII won the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, he inherited a kingdom where most of the troublesome nobles were conveniently dead. Instead of rebuilding the old system, he created something entirely different: professional administration that answered directly to the crown. Tudor bureaucrats replaced feudal lords. Royal courts superseded private justice. National taxation replaced local levies. The social changes were just as revolutionary. War casualties had created opportunities for social mobility that hadn't existed before. Merchants, lawyers, and administrators could rise to positions that had previously been reserved for hereditary nobility. English society became more flexible and merit-based than most European societies. Military organization evolved from feudal levies to professional forces that served royal rather than aristocratic interests. English armies became more disciplined, better equipped, and more loyal to central authority than traditional feudal forces. Most importantly, the Wars of the Roses created political unity that enabled England to pursue consistent foreign policy. Instead of dealing with rebellious nobles, English kings could focus on international expansion. The institutional foundations for English global dominance had been laid by a civil war that nobody intended to be transformative. Fact number 7. Spain invented thought control. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478, was medieval Europe's most sophisticated attempt at controlling what people believed, and it was terrifyingly effective. This wasn't just religious persecution. It was systematic thought control that used modern propaganda techniques 5 centuries before anyone had invented the term propaganda. Spanish authorities had a problem. They'd just conquered Islamic Granada and expelled Jews from Spain, but they suspected that many converts to Christianity were secretly maintaining their old beliefs. The Inquisition was their solution, a systematic investigation of religious sincerity that could identify and punish thought crimes. Inquisitional procedures were brilliantly designed for maximum psychological impact. Investigations were secret, accusers were anonymous, and trials were public spectacles that demonstrated the consequences of religious dissent. Auto de fe ceremonies combined religious ritual with political theater, creating community events that reinforced orthodox beliefs while terrifying potential dissenters. But the really sophisticated aspect was the propaganda system. The Inquisition didn't just punish heretics, it created an entire culture of surveillance and conformity. Neighbors informed on neighbors. Children reported their parents. Anonymous denunciations became common. Spanish society developed a climate of fear that made heterodox thinking extremely dangerous. The economic dimension was equally systematic. Property confiscation from condemned individuals provided revenue for the Inquisition, while creating financial incentives for persecution. Religious minorities were systematically excluded from commercial activities, concentrating wealth among Orthodox Christians. Educational policies ensured that future generations would be properly indoctrinated. Schools taught approved versions of history, theology, and natural philosophy. Libraries were purged of dangerous books. Intellectual life was systematically controlled to prevent the emergence of alternative ideas. The Spanish Inquisition demonstrated that modern governments could systematically control popular beliefs through comprehensive propaganda systems. The techniques they developed would be studied and imitated by totalitarian regimes for centuries. Fact number 8. The Medici turned money into art. The Medici family figured out something that most wealthy people never discover. Money can be transformed into cultural achievement that lasts forever. While other rich families were buying castles and accumulating land, the Medici were systematically investing in artists, scholars, and thinkers who would create Renaissance culture. Cosimo de' Medici revolutionized banking by creating international financial networks that connected European cities with Mediterranean trade. But his real genius was using commercial profits to fund cultural projects that enhanced Florence's reputation and his family's prestige. He supported humanist scholars, commissioned artistic masterpieces, and created Europe's first public library. The family's cultural patronage was strategically brilliant. By supporting artists like Donatello, Botticelli, and eventually Michelangelo, they associated their name with cultural achievements that would be remembered for centuries. Lorenzo the Magnificent turned the Medici Palace into Europe's most sophisticated court, attracting intellectuals and artists from throughout the continent. But the Medici weren't just wealthy patrons. They were active participants in Renaissance culture. Lorenzo was an accomplished poet who wrote in vernacular Italian. Other family members were serious scholars who contributed to humanist learning. They understood that cultural achievement required personal engagement, not just financial support. Their banking innovations created financial instruments that became standard throughout European commerce. Double-entry bookkeeping, international letters of credit, and systematic risk management techniques developed by Medici banks influenced commercial development for centuries. Political influence followed naturally from economic success and cultural prestige. The Medici produced 4 popes and married into European royal families. Their combination of commercial wealth, cultural patronage, and political power became a model for elite achievement throughout Renaissance Europe. Most remarkably, the Medici demonstrated that commercial success could enhance rather than diminish cultural achievement. They proved that business and art could be mutually reinforcing rather than competing priorities. Fact number 9. America's greatest empires peaked just before Columbus arrived. Here's one of history's most cruel ironies. The Aztec and Inca empires reached their greatest territorial extent and cultural sophistication during the 15th century, just decades before European contact would destroy them. These weren't primitive societies that Europeans encountered. They were advanced civilizations at the height of their power. The Aztec Empire under Moctezuma I had conquered most of central Mexico through military campaigns that rival anything European armies accomplished. Tenochtitlan, their capital, was larger than any European city, except possibly Constantinople. The city's engineering was so sophisticated that Spanish conquistadors compared it to Venice, with its system of canals, bridges, and artificial islands. Aztec administration was remarkably efficient. They collected tribute from conquered territories, maintained detailed records, and governed diverse populations through systematic bureaucracy. Their educational system produced literate administrators, skilled artisans, and sophisticated artists. Aztec poetry and philosophy were highly developed intellectual traditions. The Inca Empire was even more impressive. Under Pachacuti and his successors, the Inca created the largest empire in pre-Columbian America, stretching from modern-day Colombia to Chile. They accomplished this without wheeled vehicles, iron tools, or written language, achievements that make their success even more remarkable. Inca engineering was extraordinary. They built road systems through mountain terrain that challenged modern construction techniques. Their agricultural terracing supported populations in environments that European agriculture couldn't handle. Inca administration coordinated economic activity across vast distances without monetary systems. Both empires had sophisticated astronomical knowledge, impressive architectural achievements, and complex religious systems. They maintained extensive trade networks, created distinctive artistic traditions, and developed governmental systems that functioned effectively across diverse populations. The tragedy is that European diseases arrived before European chroniclers could document these civilizations at their peak. By the time Spanish observers described Aztec and Inca societies, epidemic diseases had already begun the demographic catastrophe that would facilitate European conquest. Fact number 10. Europe discovered it had a destiny. The most mind-blowing aspect of the 15th century is that it revealed something unique about European civilization, an almost compulsive drive for global expansion that other world civilizations simply didn't share. While Chinese, Islamic, and Indian civilizations achieved remarkable internal development, only Europe seemed determined to reshape the entire world. This wasn't just about technology or military capability. Other civilizations had impressive achievements in both areas. Chinese naval expeditions under Zheng He had reached Africa decades before Portuguese explorers. Islamic civilization had preserved and advanced classical learning while Europe was struggling through the Dark Ages. Indian mathematical and astronomical knowledge was highly sophisticated, but European behavior was distinctively different. Columbus's voyages represented a civilization that was willing to risk everything on speculative ventures. Portuguese exploration demonstrated systematic commitment to projects that might take generations to succeed. Spanish conquistadors showed readiness to attempt conquests that seemed impossible. European intellectual curiosity seemed unlimited. Renaissance thinkers wanted to understand everything: classical literature, natural philosophy, artistic technique, and practical technology. European scholars translated works from Arabic, Hebrew, and Greek, while creating new knowledge in every field they encountered. European commercial ambition was equally unlimited. Italian merchants created financial instruments that could coordinate economic activity across continents. Northern European cities developed manufacturing techniques that supplied global markets. European commercial networks connected regions that had never traded with each other. European political competition stimulated innovation in ways that unified empires couldn't match. Competitive pressure between European states accelerated technological development, military innovation, and organizational improvement. European rivalry created developmental dynamics that propelled European civilization forward. Most remarkably, Europeans seemed to believe that their local achievements should become global standards. Other civilizations were content with regional success, but Europeans wanted to export their religion, their political systems, their economic methods, and their cultural values to the entire world. By 1500, this distinctive European characteristic was becoming clear. They weren't just another regional civilization. They were a civilization with global ambitions that would reshape world history for the next 5 centuries.